The Arizona sun was a merciless thing. It baked the earth until the ground cracked open like dry leather and filled the air with a haze that made the horizon shimmer like glass. Eli Carter, a man of few words and fewer friends, rode across the wasteland with his hat pulled low and his rifle strapped across his back. His horse, Dusty, moved at a slow, tired pace, the animal's breath heavy from the long drive. Eli had been driving cattle since dawn. He was used to the silence of the plains, the whistle of the wind through the mesquite, the cry of a hawk circling above. But that day something broke the rhythm. A thin column of smoke rose from the valley ahead. It was faint, almost hidden in the bright afternoon light. But to a man like Eli, who'd learned to notice the smallest things, it was out of place. He nudged his horse forward. "Come on, boy," he muttered. "Let's take a look." As he rode closer, the smell hit him first. Burnt wood, gunpowder, and blood. Then he saw it. A wagon half buried in the sand, its wheels splintered, its canvas cover shredded by bullets. The horses that had once pulled it were gone, their traces cut. Eli's gut tightened. He'd seen scenes like this before, bandit ambushes that left no survivors. Still, he dismounted and moved carefully. He kept his rifle low, eyes scanning the area for movement. The silence was thick and heavy. A vulture circled above, croaking lazily as if waiting for permission to feast. Eli approached the wagon and froze. A hand hung limply from beneath the wreckage, a woman's hand, pale against the dust. He dropped to one knee and pulled back the torn canvas. She was there, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, dressed in a travel gown now torn and dirt-streaked. Her blonde hair was matted with blood, and her face was ghostly pale. One leg was trapped under a splintered wheel. Eli could see at once that it was badly injured. The flesh around the wound was swollen, discolored, almost black at the edges. "Ma'am," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, she looked right through him, her blue eyes glazed with pain and fever. Then her lips moved, whispering something he could barely catch. "Help me!" That was all he needed to hear. Eli braced himself and lifted the broken wheel off her leg. She screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the desert air. He pulled her free, realizing how light she was, like she hadn't eaten in days. Her breathing was shallow, each one a struggle. Eli checked the area one last time before carrying her to his horse. There were tracks, fresh boot prints leading away from the wagon. Whoever attacked her might still be close. He couldn't stay there. He mounted Dusty with the woman in his arms and turned toward the open plains. "Hang on," he muttered, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. As they rode, the sun began to sink, painting the desert red and gold. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering names. "Samuel, Peter," then lapsing into silence. Her head rested weakly against his chest. When the first stars appeared, Eli could see the outlines of his ranch in the distance, a small patch of land surrounded by emptiness. He pressed his heels into Dusty's sides, pushing faster. He didn't know who she was, what had happened, or if she would even survive the night. But he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her to die in the dust. As he crossed the final ridge, the last rays of sunlight fell on her leg. The flesh had turned darker, a creeping black that spread like ink beneath her skin. Eli felt a chill crawl up his spine. He whispered under his breath, "Lord help us. That ain't just a wound." And with that, the rancher disappeared into the darkness, carrying the stranger whose life and fate had just collided with his own. The night had fallen hard over the desert by the time Eli Carter reached his ranch. The sky was a dark ocean scattered with stars, and the cold wind howled through the canyons. Dusty, his old horse, stumbled into the yard, sweat glistening on its coat. In Eli's arms, the young woman was barely breathing, her head rolling weakly against his shoulder. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, sliding down from the saddle. His voice was steady, but inside he felt a rare and uneasy panic. He'd seen wounds before, gunshots, knife cuts, even infections that turned bad, but this was different. The blackness crawling up her leg wasn't natural. It was like watching death spread under her skin. He kicked open the door to the ranch house, calling out, "Martha, get me some hot water now!" From the back room came the sound of shuffling feet. Martha Turner, Eli's old housekeeper, appeared holding a lamp. Her gray hair was tied in a bun, and her eyes widened when she saw the stranger in his arms. "Good Lord, Eli, what's happened?" she gasped. "Bandit ambush," he said, laying the woman gently on the kitchen table. She was the only one left alive. Martha leaned in close, inspecting the wound. The woman's dress was torn up to her thigh, and the injury looked worse under the lamplight. The skin around the cut was swollen, a deep, ugly color spreading outward, black mixed with purple veins. Martha's expression darkened. "That's bad, Eli. That's poison in the blood." "Maybe a bullet wound gone septic." Eli clenched his jaw. "She's burning up." "Fever's taken her." He poured whiskey over the wound. The woman stirred, groaning softly. Her face twisted in pain, but she didn't wake. Eli could feel the heat from her skin. It was like she was on fire. Martha fetched towels and a bowl of water, her hands trembling. "If it's gone into her blood, there's not much we can do," she whispered. "Once it turns black like that, it's only a matter of hours." Eli didn't respond. He'd heard those words before, during the war, when doctors said the same thing about dying soldiers. He remembered their screams, the smell of rot, and the terrible choices men had to make to save a life. "She's still breathing," he said firmly, "so we'll fight it." He began cleaning the wound, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. Martha brought a wet cloth and dabbed the woman's forehead, whispering small prayers under her breath. The fever raged on. Her skin glistened with sweat, and her breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Hours passed. The fire burned low, filling the room with a warm orange glow. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. Inside, time felt frozen between life and death. Then just before midnight, the woman's eyes opened. They were glassy, unfocused, but full of fear. She tried to sit up, gasping. "My leg. It burns." Eli placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't move. You're safe now." She looked at him, confused and half delirious. "Safe?" she whispered. They killed everyone. My brother, my husband." Her voice broke into a sob. Eli said nothing. He knew words couldn't mend that kind of pain. But when she tried to lift the blanket and saw her own leg, she screamed, a long, raw sound that echoed through the cabin. No, it's turning black." "Please, make it stop!" Eli's stomach twisted. The black veins were creeping higher. Whatever had infected her, it was spreading faster now. Martha turned to him, eyes wide. "Eli, you can't just clean that. You know what you've got to do." Eli met her gaze. He did know, and the thought made his hands tremble. Martha nodded grimly. "If you don't, she'll be dead by sunrise." He looked down at the woman, this stranger who'd stumbled into his lonely world. She was crying now, whispering, "Please, let me die." Eli stood there for a long moment, the lamplight flickering across his face. Then he took a deep breath, his voice low and steady. "No," he said, "not while I'm still breathing." He turned toward the fire, grabbed a long piece of iron from the hearth and thrust it into the flames. The metal began to glow red. The room filled with the sound of crackling fire and the scent of smoke. Martha looked away, whispering another prayer. Eli stood silent, watching the iron burn hotter and hotter. He knew what he was about to do. It wasn't mercy. It was war. And in the Wild West, sometimes mercy had to bleed before it could heal. The wind outside howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the old ranch house. Inside, the air was thick with fear, smoke, and the faint smell of burning iron. The metal rod in the fire had turned a deep, glowing red, hot enough to burn through flesh. Eli Carter stood before the hearth, his face half shadowed by the firelight. Beads of sweat rolled down his temples, though the night was cold. He had done many hard things in his life, things no man should ever have to do. But this one tore at his soul. Behind him, the young woman lay on the kitchen table, trembling and delirious, her breaths shallow and uneven. Her name, he'd learned, was Clara Whitfield. She'd whispered it once before falling unconscious again. Now her skin glistened with fever and the veins on her leg had turned black as coal. climbing inch by inch toward her thigh. Eli turned to Martha, who stood by the corner with her apron twisted in her hands, her face pale. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were on Clara, on the pain written across her face even in sleep. "If I don't," he said finally, "she's gone before dawn." Martha nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Then may the Lord forgive you for what you're about to do." Eli took the iron from the fire. It hissed like a serpent as he raised it, glowing bright orange. He set it on the table beside her, the heat warping the air around it. Clara stirred, her eyelids fluttering. When she saw the iron, panic filled her eyes. "No! Please!" she whispered, voice trembling. "Please don't." Eli knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. But if I don't take the rot, it'll take you." She shook her head weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. It hurts too much. Just let me die." Those words hit Eli harder than any bullet ever had. He looked into her eyes, saw the terror, the exhaustion, the hopelessness, and something inside him rebelled against it. "No," he said, his voice low and rough. "I've buried too many people who didn't have a choice. You ain't gonna be one of them." He poured whiskey over the wound again. Clara screamed, arching her back in pain. Martha gripped her shoulders to keep her still, whispering prayers. Eli took a deep breath, his heart pounding like thunder in his chest. Then, with one swift motion, he pressed the red-hot iron against her leg. The sound was sickening, a hiss, like flesh meeting hellfire. Clara's scream filled the entire ranch, echoing off the walls, piercing through the wind outside. The smell of burnt flesh filled the room, choking the air. Martha turned away, weeping silently. Eli kept his hand steady, his jaw locked tight as the iron seared away the infection. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, but he forced himself to hold it there. The blackened flesh curled and smoked under the heat, the rot sizzling away. When it was done, he threw the iron back into the fire and sank to his knees, shaking. Clara lay motionless, her breathing ragged. Her skin was ghostly pale, soaked with sweat. Martha rushed to her side, checking her pulse. "She's alive," she whispered. "God help her, she's still alive!" Eli wiped his face with a trembling hand. His palms were blistered, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. He stared at the burn mark running along Clara's leg, a cruel, ugly brand of survival. "Fetch me bandages," he said quietly. "And more whiskey," Martha obeyed. They cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, and covered her with a blanket. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the faint, steady breathing of the woman who had just defied death. When everything was finally still, Eli sat down in the chair beside her. His eyes were tired, but they didn't leave her face. He whispered to the empty room, "You're tougher than you look, miss. Don't make me regret saving you." Outside, the desert was silent again, and the moon climbed high over the empty plains. The worst of it was over, or so Eli thought. But deep down, he knew that saving her was only the beginning. Because in the Wild West, mercy always came with a price. The ranch was quiet after the screaming stopped. Too quiet. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving only the low creak of the porch and the distant cry of a coyote under the moonlight. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt flesh and smoke, a haunting reminder of what had just been done. Eli Carter sat slumped beside the bed, his hands still trembling. The blood on his shirt had dried, forming dark stains that clung to the rough fabric. Across the small room, Martha sat near the fire, her eyes red from crying. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The only sound came from the shallow, uneven breaths of the woman lying on the bed. Clara Whitfield looked more like a ghost than a living soul. Her skin was as pale as candle wax, her hair matted with sweat, and her lips dry and cracked. The wound on her leg was wrapped in fresh linen, but the memory of what had happened, of that terrible scream, still echoed in Eli's head. He poured a small measure of whiskey into a tin cup and took a long drink before setting it down on the table. "She'll make it," he muttered, more to himself than to Martha. Martha didn't answer right away. She just stared into the fire, her voice soft when it came. "You burned her near to death, Eli. I don't know if her body can take it." Eli's jaw tightened. "I did what I had to." Silence again. The kind that fills every corner of a room and makes a man question his choices. After a while, Eli stood and went to the window. The desert stretched out under the moonlight, endless and empty. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there watching. The men who attacked Clara's wagon might have seen the smoke from his chimney. Bandits didn't leave survivors, not if they thought there was unfinished business. He turned back to Clara. Her body shivered under the blanket. Beads of sweat rolled down her temples. She was fighting the fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. Every few minutes she would mutter something, broken words, names, fragments of memories. "Samuel." "Don't leave me," she whispered once, her voice hoarse. Eli sat beside her again, dipping a cloth in cool water and wiping her forehead. "Easy now," he said quietly. "You're safe here." For a moment her eyes flickered open. They were glassy, filled with confusion. She looked at him as if trying to remember who he was. "You, the rancher," she breathed weakly. "Why'd you save me?" Eli paused. He wasn't sure himself. He'd told Martha it was the right thing to do, that no decent man would leave someone to die out there. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. Maybe it was because he'd seen too many people die before. Maybe it was because the world had taken enough without his help. "Because no one deserves to die alone," he finally said. Her eyes softened, just a little before they closed again. Her breathing steadied. Hours crawled by. Martha dozed off in her chair. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Eli stayed awake, watching over the stranger he'd saved. He changed her bandages twice, cleaned her wound, and whispered small things just to keep her anchored to life. Stories from his cattle drives, from the war, from a time when he still believed in redemption. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, the fever finally began to break. Clara's breathing grew slower, calmer. Her face, once twisted with pain, now seemed peaceful. Eli leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling in his bones. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to close his eyes. When he woke, the room was bright with morning light. Martha was stirring oatmeal on the stove. And Clara, against all odds, was still breathing. Her color had returned faintly to her cheeks. "She's alive," Martha said softly. "You did it." Eli exhaled slowly, staring at the sleeping woman. He wanted to feel relief, but something in his gut told him this wasn't the end. Out there, beyond the hills, evil men still rode, the ones who had left her for dead, and Eli Carter had just given them a reason to come looking. The days after Clara's recovery began were slow and uneasy. The fever had broken, but her strength hadn't returned. Most of her time was spent resting in the small room at the back of the ranch house, where the scent of sage and smoke lingered. Her leg, wrapped in clean bandages, still burned and ached, but the blackness was gone. What was left was a deep, angry scar, a mark that would never fade. Eli Carter spent most of those days outside, tending to his cattle, fixing the fence line, and trying to quiet the storm inside his own head. Every time he came back into the house, he'd find Martha by Clara's side, spooning her broth or reading softly from her worn Bible. Clara rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice was soft and haunted. One morning, Eli brought her a tray of food, cornbread, eggs, and coffee. She managed a small smile. "You didn't have to do this," she said weakly. Eli shrugged. "Figured you'd need your strength. You're still healing." She looked down at her leg, frowning. "Healing," she murmured. "Feels more like learning to live with what's left." Eli didn't answer. He knew what it meant to carry scars. Some were on the skin, others buried deeper. As the day wore on, the air outside grew heavier. The horizon shimmered with heat, but something else hung in the air, a tension Eli could feel in his bones. He was repairing the barn door when he saw it. Smoke, faint but unmistakable, rising from the valley to the south. He froze. Out here, smoke meant one of two things: a campfire or trouble. He went inside, his boots crunching against the wooden floor. "Martha," he said quietly, "get Clara to the cellar." Martha's eyes widened. "What is it?" Eli looked toward the window. "Riders. Maybe 3, maybe more. Not local folk." Clara tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Riders? Are you sure?" Eli gave her a steady look. "You were the only one alive at that wagon. I'm guessing whoever did it ain't happy about that." A tremor of fear passed through her. "They'll come for me," she whispered. "They always finish the job." Eli loaded his Winchester rifle and checked the chamber. "Not while I'm standing." He moved outside to the porch, scanning the valley through his scope. The figures were small in the distance, moving slowly but deliberately. Dust rose behind their horses, shimmering in the heat. They weren't travelers. They were hunters. By sundown, the riders had drawn closer. Eli could make out 4 of them now, dark coats, wide hats, rifles across their saddles. They rode without haste, confident. Men like that didn't fear much. He returned inside. "They'll reach here by nightfall," he said. "You two stay quiet. Keep the lamps low. Martha, if I tell you to run, you take her through the root cellar out back. Follow the creek bed west." Martha nodded, her face pale. Clara, however, shook her head. "I won't leave," she said firmly. "I've run enough. If they want me, they'll have to go through you, and me." Eli almost smiled. "You ain't in no shape to fight." "Maybe not," she replied. "But I'm done being a victim." He respected that. Maybe she wasn't strong in body yet, but he could see it in her eyes. She had fire again. As night fell, the desert went silent. Even the crickets stopped singing. The only sound was the faint jingle of spurs and the creak of leather as the riders came closer. Eli waited in the dark, rifle in hand, every sense sharpened. Through the crack in the window, he saw them dismount and spread out, moving with purpose. They knew someone was here. Eli whispered under his breath, "All right, boys, come and try." Inside, Martha held Clara close as the first crunch of boots echoed across the porch. A knock, slow, deliberate, rattled the wooden door. "Evening, rancher," a rough voice called. "We're looking for a woman. Blonde hair. Got hurt a few days back. You seen her?" Eli didn't answer. He just pulled the hammer back on his Winchester. The next sound was the click of guns being cocked outside, and then the valley exploded with gunfire. The war Eli thought he'd left behind had just come to his doorstep. The first gunshot tore through the silence like thunder. Glass shattered, and the oil lamp near the window exploded in a burst of flame. Eli Carter dropped to the floor, rolling. Behind the heavy oak table, his rifle tight in his hands. Outside, horses neighed and boots thudded against the porch. The bandits had arrived, and they weren't wasting time with talk. Martha screamed from the back room, and Clara Whitfield, still weak but alert, clutched the edge of her bed, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear the chaos beyond the door, the crash of furniture, the echo of gunfire, Eli shouting something she couldn't make out. The ranch, which had felt like a fragile shelter, now became a battlefield. Eli peeked over the table, spotting 2 figures moving near the barn. He fired once. A man cried out and dropped, clutching his chest. The other dove behind a trough, bullets sparking off the metal. "Stay down!" Eli yelled toward the bedroom. "Don't come out!" Martha grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the trapdoor in the corner. "We need to get you to the cellar," she whispered urgently, but Clara shook her head. "He can't fight them alone." "Girl, you can barely stand." "I owe him my life," Clara said, cutting her off. "I won't hide while he dies for me." Before Martha could argue, another gunshot echoed, closer this time. The front door burst open. and one of the bandits stumbled in, his face smeared with dirt, his revolver raised. "Found ya!" he snarled. Clara froze. Martha gasped. But before the man could pull the trigger, Eli fired from the shadows. The bullet struck him square in the chest. He fell backward, crashing into the table. Eli reloaded quickly, breathing hard. The smell of gunpowder filled the room, stinging his nose. Through the smoke, he could see more shadows moving outside, at least 2 left. They were circling the house, using the cover of night. He crawled to the window, keeping low. His hands were steady, his instincts sharp, like the old days in the war. He fired twice, driving one of the bandits into the dirt. But a third shot from outside whizzed past his head, splintering the wall beside him. Clara could hear the fight raging. She pushed herself out of bed, every movement agony. Her injured leg screamed in protest, but she bit her lip and kept going. Martha tried to stop her, but Clara limped to the dresser and grabbed Eli's revolver. "You can't even hold that steady," Martha cried. "Maybe not," Clara said, "but I can aim." In the next instant, the back window shattered. A bandit climbed through, his knife glinting in the firelight. Clara didn't hesitate. She raised the revolver, both hands trembling, and pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the room. The man fell, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment, everything went silent. The only sound was Clara's ragged breathing and the crackle of the dying fire. Then Eli burst into the room, rifle still in hand. His eyes widened when he saw the body on the floor, and Clara holding the smoking gun. "You all right?" he asked. Clara nodded, lowering the weapon. "I think so." Eli glanced outside again. "That's 3. 1 left." They heard hooves outside, someone running for their horse. Eli ran to the porch, firing one last shot into the darkness. A distant cry answered him, then nothing. The valley went still again, save for the echo of the wind. For a long time, no one moved. Then Eli lowered his rifle and exhaled, his whole body trembling with exhaustion. "It's over," he said quietly. Inside, Clara sat back on the bed, the revolver slipping from her hands. Martha rushed to her, embracing her tightly. Eli stepped back into the house, looking around at the wreckage, the bullet holes, the broken glass, the blood. His home was a ruin, but they were alive. Against every odd, they'd survived the night. Clara looked up at him through tears. "You saved me again," she whispered. Eli shook his head. "No, ma'am. This time, you saved me." Outside, dawn began to creep over the desert, painting the horizon gold. The long night was over, but Eli knew the peace wouldn't last. Blood had been spilled, and in the Wild West, blood always brought more trouble. Still, as the light filled the valley, something had changed between them, something quiet, unspoken. A bond forged in fire and fear, and for the first time in years, Eli Carter dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth living for again. The morning after the gunfight was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The desert wind had stilled, and the only sounds were the distant buzz of flies and the creak of the porch as Eli Carter buried the dead. 4 fresh graves now marked the edge of his property, unwanted reminders of the blood that had been spilled to keep his home standing. He worked in silence, his shirt soaked through with sweat, the sun glaring down on him like judgment. Every strike of the shovel echoed across the valley. He didn't look at the faces of the men he buried. They'd made their choice when they came for her. Inside the ranch house, Clara Whitfield sat near the window, her leg propped up on a stool. The wound still hurt, but it was no longer the pain that troubled her. It was what Eli had said the night before. "You saved me." She kept replaying the gunfire, the screaming, the moment she'd pulled the trigger. It had been her or the man with the knife. But now that it was over, the weight of it pressed down on her chest. She wasn't sure if she felt proud or broken. Martha moved quietly around the room, cleaning up what she could. "You did what you had to do, dear," she said softly, sensing Clara's unease. "There's no shame in surviving," Clara nodded but didn't answer. Her hand drifted to the small silver locket that hung around her neck. It had been there since Eli found her in the wrecked wagon. She hadn't opened it since. Outside, Eli finished the last grave and came inside, wiping the dust from his hands. He glanced at Clara. "How's the leg?" "Hurts less," she said quietly. "Thanks to you." Eli nodded, setting his hat on the table. He looked like a man worn thin, not just from battle, but from years of carrying ghosts. Martha poured him a cup of coffee. "You should rest, Eli. Lord knows you've earned it." He took a sip and stared out the window. "Rest'll come when I'm sure we ain't got more company." Clara hesitated before speaking again. "They came for something," she said. "Not just me." Eli turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" She touched the locket again. Her hands trembled slightly. "The men who attacked our wagon? They weren't just bandits. My husband, he was carrying something valuable. A claim deed for a silver mine out past Fort Hamilton. He never told me the details, only that it could change our lives." Eli's expression hardened. "So that's what they wanted?" Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "They killed him for it. My brother, too. I thought I'd die there with them." Her voice broke. "When you found me, I didn't care if I lived or not. But now," she looked up, meeting his gaze. "Now I do." Eli sat across from her, silent for a moment. Then he said, "You still got that deed?" Clara shook her head. "I thought it burned with the wagon, but—" She opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed and stained with blood. "He must have hidden it here." Eli leaned forward. The handwriting was faded, but the seal was clear. A mining claim, signed and recorded. Martha gasped softly. "That's worth a fortune." Eli's eyes stayed on Clara. "That's also why they won't stop coming." Clara closed the locket and held it tight to her chest. "Then I'll go," she said firmly. "I won't bring more trouble to your doorstep." Eli shook his head. "You can't even walk a mile on that leg. Besides," he glanced out the window toward the graves, "we've already got trouble buried out there." "What's done is done." Clara's eyes softened. "Why are you helping me, Eli?" "You don't even know me." He stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "Maybe I don't need to. Maybe I just know what it's like to lose everything and still want to make it right." The room fell quiet again. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, golden under the setting sun. The danger wasn't gone, not yet, but for the first time since the attack, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She looked down at the locket in her hand, the letter inside it, and the man who had saved her life twice over. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. The sun rose slowly over the Arizona plains, washing the land in soft gold and red. The storm of blood and fear that had consumed the ranch was gone, replaced by the stillness that comes only after survival. For the first time in days, the wind carried no smell of smoke or gunpowder, only the scent of sagebrush and the faint whisper of a new beginning. Eli Carter stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, staring out at the graves near the fence line. 4 men lay beneath that dry earth, proof that death had visited his land and gone. He'd seen death before far too many times, but this one felt different. He hadn't fought for gold or revenge this time. He'd fought for someone else's life. Behind him, the door creaked open. Clara Whitfield stepped outside slowly, her limp still noticeable, but her spirit far stronger than the fragile woman he had first carried out of the desert. The morning sun glinted off the small silver locket at her neck, the one that had nearly cost her everything. "You're up early," Eli said, glancing over his shoulder. Clara smiled faintly. "Didn't sleep much?" "The desert's too quiet after a fight." He nodded, taking another sip of coffee. "Quiet's a blessing around here. Means we're still alive." For a moment, they just stood there in silence, watching the light climb over the distant hills. The land stretched endlessly before them, raw, beautiful, and unforgiving. It was the kind of place that demanded strength. And somehow, against every odd, Clara had found hers. She looked down at her bandaged leg. "It's healing," she said softly. Ugly but healing. Eli's voice was low, steady. Scars are proof you survived. Everyone tells a story. Her eyes met his. Then I suppose this one tells yours too. The man who wouldn't let me die. He almost smiled but didn't. Eli wasn't a man used to praise. I just did what had to be done. Clara turned toward the valley, the rising sun catching in her hair. Martha told me you fought in the war, she said. That you left because you'd seen too much death. Eli stared into the horizon for a long time before replying. That's true enough. Spent years trying to forget the faces, the ones I couldn't save. Then you came along, and I remembered what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Clara's eyes softened. You did more than save me, Eli. You gave me a reason to keep going. He set the mug down on the railing. What'll you do now? Once that leg's strong again. She hesitated, then unclasped the locket from her neck. Inside was the folded deed, the claim her husband had died for. There's a mine out there, she said. Silver enough to start over, maybe even help others. But I can't do it alone. Eli looked at her for a long moment. You sure that's what you want? That claim's brought you nothing but pain. Maybe, she said softly. But I've learned that running from the past doesn't make it disappear. I want to face it, finish what they started, and maybe make something good out of all that loss. Eli nodded slowly. You'll need someone who knows the land, someone who can keep you alive out there. Her smile was small but real. I was hoping you'd say that, Martha's voice called from inside. Breakfast's ready, you two. Don't make me eat it all myself. Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Eli had found her. The sound was light, genuine, almost startling. Eli couldn't help but smile, too. They went inside together, the warmth of the morning following them in. The house was battered, scarred by bullets and smoke, but it felt alive again. The walls that had once echoed with pain now carried something new. Hope. Later that afternoon, Eli saddled his horse and helped Clara mount hers. The valley stretched before them, open and endless. The graves behind them were a reminder of what they had endured. The rising trail ahead promised something more. As they rode out, the wind swept through the grass, carrying away the last traces of the fight, of the blood, of the fear. Eli glanced over at Clara. You ready? She smiled, eyes bright against the morning sun. I've never been more ready. He tipped his hat, urging his horse forward. Together they rode toward the mountains, toward the mine, the unknown, and the life waiting beyond the dust. And for the first time in years, Eli Carter didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. He felt like a man heading toward something worth living for. The desert wind rose behind them, whispering through the sage and the sand, as the story of the rancher and the woman he saved faded into legend, a tale of mercy, fire, and the unthinkable act that changed them both forever.